Jefferson Robbins for NCW Life. Every seat on the Wenatchee School Board is up for election, but only 3 seats have contested races. I'm joined by one of the candidates for District 2 in the Wenatchee School District race, Maria Iñiguez. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're the incumbent in this race. You're currently serving as president of the Wenatchee School Board. Beyond that, can you tell me a little bit about yourself and how you came to this position?
I have been serving on the board since January 2020 when I was appointed. I ran to retain my seat and was elected to serve on the board in 2021. So currently, this past year, I have been serving as the board president. In regards to my professional experience, my professional life, I currently serve as the chief of staff at Wenatchee Valley College.
Have you been involved with education as a profession most of your career?
I have. My graduate degree is focused on education. I have worked in higher education for 5 years and then K-12 education for 13 years.
In a second term, if you're elected this time around, what would you see your role on the board being? Are there particular committees you want to serve on or particular things you want to bring forward?
Yeah, so I've been fortunate enough to serve as the president, vice president, as well as the policy committee for a couple years. One of the committees I have not served on is the legislative representative, and that plays a significant role. And, you know, with my experience serving on, I used to serve on the Latino Legislative Committee for the state, and so bringing that experience into the school board, I think it would be an exciting challenge.
And the legislative committee is simply where you represent our school district in talking to the legislature about needs and directions that you'd like state educational guidance to go.
Correct. Voting on priorities that WASA is going to present. Yes.
During the first term, I know that you ran in 2021 when we were in the midst of COVID pandemic. You came on in 2020 as that was beginning. Did you foresee, or could you have foreseen, all the challenges to the district that emerged from the 2 years that we've just gone through?
Not at all. Yeah. Not at all.
What was the most challenging aspect, do you think?
I think for me, it was my priority was the safety of our students and staff, and balancing that with getting kids back in school, hearing the public's needs, but also hearing the staff and student needs. And that was challenging, balancing both sides, because the reality is that our community was very divided.
How well do you think the district has recovered from the pandemic? And that is not to say that the disease is over, we still live with it. But how well do you think that the Wenatchee School District coped with that crisis, and how is it taking those lessons forward?
Yeah, I think at the time we followed the science, we followed state mandates, and we did best as we could for what the information we had and what we knew about, the disease. Could we have done things differently? Absolutely. Because seeing the impact that it had on our children, on our community, on our parents, but moving forward, I think we're finally jumping that hurdle and starting to see somewhat of normalcy. Last year was a little bit challenging for our teachers, for our students, our parents, just getting back into the routine, tackling that academic gap that we saw. But I think we're back on track to some degree, and hopefully that's behind us.
There was a fairly vocal contingent of people, some in the district and some outside, who wanted to see the end of what they called mandates, the end of masking requirements, and they were very energetic about that. Could the district have said, you're right, this governor's rule is wrong, and we're going to unmask our students or unmask for our public meetings? Could the district have taken that step?
Absolutely, but with that is funding was tied to it. So a school can't run without its funding, and we saw that happening through our districts in the area. I think the Tri-Cities had
Richmond School District.
Had similar situation, and they got plenty of warnings saying, hey, if this is a step you're going to take, we will pull your funding. And eventually they reversed their decision.
And every school board member who voted to remove masks has been recalled by the voters since then.
Yeah, so there was risk with taking that step for that school district.
Did you support the idea of districted elections for the Wenatchee School District? And corollary to that, are you finding it different to run in a district, sub-district now, rather than in the district at large?
I did support, yes, I fully support the redistricting of our school board elections. The intent is obviously we have to comply with the Washington State Voters Act. And the intent of the act is to get representation from different parts of the community. As we know here in Wenatchee, we have a very diverse community. Unfortunately, this time around, we didn't see that diversification in the candidates running for school board election. But hopefully, this is a step in the right direction. Obviously, we need to comply with the law. We took it upon us to make those changes before it became a requirement, costing us legal fees. But yeah, and with that comes its challenges, good and bad. Campaigning within a district is a little bit more doable, hitting more households. Your area is a little bit smaller versus citywide, but at the same time, it's hard to target your area when you're doing large campaign ads, and it's good and bad. So far, it's been a lot calmer than 2 years ago. Let's say it's the work is more doable, but just getting your name out there and visibility in regards to marketing, it's a little bit more challenging.
It sounds like your hope might have been with the redistricting that more Latinx candidates might have stepped forward, because this change was undertaken in part to represent those, I think, 30% of residents in the district
Correct.
who are Hispanic, and 54% of students
Correct.
are Hispanic. So
Yeah.
you wanted to see more of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, ideally, I feel like our board should reflect the demographics of the students we serve, or at least the community.
Something that you mentioned when we talked about the COVID pandemic was state testing scores.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen in this go-round fairly, should I say, poor performance. The percentage of students who are meeting state standards is lower than 50%. It's about 42%, I think, is the upper end. To what do you attribute that? And do you think that's a valuable marker or an indicator? Can the school district learn from these scores?
Oh, absolutely. We did see a decline in our test scores from the last 2 years. Obviously, we attribute those to the pandemic and, all the setbacks from remote learning, virtual hybrid learning, and just the emotional impacts of COVID. But, we have been tasked, now that we have those numbers, we have been tasked with the work and identifying the factors of why students are not meeting standards. And these are the difficult questions I have been asking the board. It's great to celebrate the gains and the students meeting standards, but we really need to look at the data, which I define as ugly data, right? It's not comfortable to look at, but we really need to focus on, that 60% student population. What do those numbers look like? Who are these students? What are the demographic of the students? And really target the needs of the students to allow them to make gains as their counterparts who are meeting standards. So
if 42% are meeting standards, we need to look at the other 58% and say, what led to this point? Exactly. And let's not forget about those that are meeting standard, because, part of the work that I advocate for is let's serve all students. That includes our highly capable students and whatnot. But yeah, I think we really need to narrow down the focus on the students that are not meeting the standards, and what academic supports can we provide. And unfortunately, some of our students are going to have to be making faster growth than their counterparts, otherwise that academic gap is going to continue to grow. Maria, during your term, the board has adopted a commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. This, I think, came down from guidelines from Olympia. Correct. Can you sort of explain from the board's perspective what DEI is and why it was important to recognize and adopt? So not only are there state requirements that we have to comply with, but I believe, we live in a
in a beautifully diverse community. Again, our student population for Latinx community is 54% students. 50% of our students are Latinx. Our community is about 30. And then we do have, other races that our students make up. And so, oftentimes when we think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, we think about it only being a race component. But right now, if we talk about inclusion in our school district, we're talking about inclusion of our special education students, integrating into the integration of them into the mainstream classrooms. If we're talking about diversity, we're talking about just recognizing everybody, what everybody brings to the table, how they identify. Again, it's not just about race, right? And then the equity part is, again, giving every student what they need, regardless if there are highly capable students, special education students, our English language learners. There is just broad range. And I think, unfortunately, DEI has a negative connotation because it says, well, we're going to take from this student to give to another student. And it's not about that. It's about creating children that are whole, creating environments that are safe, and where we can grow lifelong learners.
Does the district, does the board see DEI as being a component of its future ready strategy? To make kids future ready, you need to observe these three components as well?
Yeah, it's embedded into our strategic plan. Not as specifically as DEI, but part of the inclusion model is our students feeling safe. Unfortunately, before the pandemic, we had student surveys, and we found out that students a lot of students were not feeling safe in our buildings, and that's a big problem. And so, from student surveys, from mandates from the state, from community input, we have been able to take those responses and embed them into the strategic plan.
Pandemic relief aid to school districts dried up this year. With that and with other changes, do you think that the board should have foreseen the large budget gap that you had to struggle with this year in getting your finances ready for 2024?
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Yeah, it's one of the biggest challenges that we're facing right now.
Were there warning signs that you look back and say, well, we should have known this was coming?
Yes. Unfortunately, our budget crisis was a combination of COVID funding as well as, a little bit of budgeting errors.
Do you see a time when the district might recover from that, when we could have our teachers and staff back at the levels we were seeing in 2020, 2021?
That's a great question. So our budget reduction in regards to staffing, that's a 2-year plan. So we're in year 1 of that plan. We'll see more reductions, hopefully less than projected for the upcoming school year. After that, we are projected to be back where we needed to be in regards to our budget. But I think it's also a good time to really analyze what our student teacher ratio is, or student staff ratio is. And what I mean by that is that as our enrollment numbers go down, what is adequate staffing? What does that staffing look like? I know, say 5 years ago, our enrollment was higher, our staffing numbers were lower. And then, that kind of took a big flip. We sustained our staffing, and now, due to budget cuts, we have reduced staffing. So I think it's an opportunity to really take a look at our enrollment numbers and the staffing needs.
I was going to ask about enrollment because I think the prediction has been 300 fewer students within
Correct.
2 or 3 years of now. Is that decline in enrollment really a foregone conclusion, or is the future not yet set in terms of enrollment?
Based on the trends, I think we can anticipate the continued decrease in enrollment. With other private schools starting up in the Valley, I think that might also have an impact on it. Our charter school in the Valley is also increasing grade levels, the service of grade levels, and that's also going to have an impact. So we have to be proactive and err on the side of caution. I think our CFO does a really good job at his projections and being conservative in his numbers.
A campaign question for you, Maria. In 2021, for the race that you won, you raised more than $28,000 for reelection, and about $1,500 of it came from the Washington Education Association. Is it proper for a school board member to take donations from the statewide teachers union, do you think? And would you do so again?
Yeah, so this year I actually those funds from 2 years ago came from an endorsement from the Washington Education Association PAC. This year I have also been endorsed by them, so I did have a contribution come from them. I believe it was total $500, and they have their political action council that specifically focus on this work. So it's not taken away, say, from from teachers itself, but there's a specific component of the organization that focuses on campaigning.
But somebody can look at the donations to a candidate and say, well, this candidate received so much money from this interest, therefore they're beholden to that interest. Do you feel like you can, stay neutral in questions of, say, teachers union negotiations in the district?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, we have to. It's an ethics thing.
Do you expect that this set of races will be as expensive as 2021?
No. Again, this goes back to the districting. Running a campaign citywide is significantly different than districting. And, so far in my race, I have not seen the need to race as much as 2 years ago.
Maria, should the board have looked into the residency of Catherine Thomas earlier, considering that some board members were raising questions as early as April of this year? It's not the responsibility of the school board or the superintendent. It is the responsibility of the board member to be forthcoming. And, if that is the case, present the board with this information. I did research along with the superintendent in regards to what the responsibility of the board is. And ultimately, we were told that it is not the responsibility of the board to do such investigation. To police its own members?
Correct.
To see if their residency is accurately described?
That's correct. And because there was no notification from Catherine, we couldn't proceed with that, with the hearsay. What's
the status of that situation now? I think you said at the last board meeting that there had been an appointment made to speak with Ms. Thomas about her residency.
Correct. That's where we're at. We have a date set in the near future, and then hopefully after a conversation with the superintendent herself and myself, we will have something to report at our next board meeting.
Do you think the board, I know the board has gone through a process of adopting new ethics policies. Do you think there's a room for the board to address residency specifically in future ethics policies?
I think the board, and this is something that as I mentioned in previous board meetings, is that I had been requesting from the board policy to update our attendance policy. I don't currently serve on that board, on that committee, but for me, it was about the attendance aspect of it. We don't have a policy that specifically states, in-person attendance versus remote attendance. And I think in regards to, the work that we were doing and what we were witnessing is that, okay, let's update our policy, whatever way the policy committee would like to present it, but let's make sure that we are following, and we have a policy for board member attendance. So that was my first step in regards to making sure that we were complying with what we're doing. And we do have a policy in regards to residency, but ultimately it's up to the individual to report their residency. What is our role in regards to investigating a board member's residency? So it's challenging.
In the last 2 to 3 years, we have seen sort of a culture war playground, battlefield play out in Wenatchee School District at at least one of the board meetings, and I know you remember that one very well. Can we dial that back in the future?
I sure hope so. I think I think part of it is that we've lost sight of the role of a school board. Our role is to serve our community. Our students are first and foremost, and we run nonpartisan races for a reason, and to allow politics and personal agendas to come into our school board meetings, it's challenging. It's challenging, and I think we need to move away from that so that we can really focus on serving the needs of our students.
Students who are LGBTQ may at this point in time feel particularly vulnerable because we have candidates and people speaking at schools, school boards, saying that the policies that you're adopting are discriminatory against other students because you're favoring this group or that group, or that LGBTQ identities shouldn't be recognized. Can LGBTQ students feel safe in the Wenatchee schools, do you think?
We're working towards that. We're working towards that. We do have policies, and we have policies that protect our LGBTQ students as well as our student body as a whole. Again, that goes back into making sure our students feel safe. And I think part of that, for those student service, a lot of it stemmed from that, from students that didn't feel like they were being accepted, teachers, peers, administrators. And so, it's challenging, but that's one of my goals is staff, student safety, and that sense of belonging, because a student is not going to thrive in an environment where they don't feel safe, where they don't feel like they belong. And our district has been proactive. We do have policies that protect students, and my work on the school board is to make sure that every student is heard, feels safe, and represented in our district.
Maria, what would you say is your best qualification to continue service on the school board?
I've dedicated my whole professional career to education. Part of that, also outside of my professional career, my volunteer in the community. But also, I think most importantly also is my personal life lived experiences. So combination between, and what I mean by life lived experiences, I was raised by a single mother, experienced homelessness, depended a lot on social services from the community. I'm an English language learner. I saw education as an opportunity to change the trajectory of my family. And so those lived experiences allowed me to, see things differently than somebody that hasn't lived those experiences. Academic has opened so many doors for me, and I want to pave the path for those students that come, that are before me, that are in front of me, and use my professional and my lived experiences to guide the school district to achieve, high standards for all students and create successful lifelong learners that will come back to our community and, give back.
Maria Iñiguez, running for retention in District 2 of the Wenatchee School Board. Thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you for having me.
You're watching the NCW Life channel.